Hello everybody and welcome to another Dwarf Fortress tutorial. In this video I'm going to be discussing Marksdwarves. This is ranged combat dwarves, so dwarves that use crossbows. Now some people are asking about bows and arrows. Because bows and arrows are technically a foreign weapon and only humans can make them and dwarves by default cannot, I'm not going to be covering bows and arrows. However, if you end up with a surplus of bows and arrows in your fortress and decide to use them, the process is exactly the same. One caveat I'm going to put at the beginning of this tutorial is I'm going to be showing some designs for defenses for Marksdwarves. Please note while watching this video, Bay12 Games are currently updating Marksdwarves to potentially change their behavior and or abilities. So if any major changes happen, I will either unlist this video or pin a comment beneath this video explaining the changes. If the video becomes completely obsolete, I'll remake it. Otherwise, if the video is still up and you are watching it, this should still function as I am showing in the video. So let's dive in. One of the most noted problems I've heard a lot of people discussing with Marksdwarves is them attacking the enemy instead of simply standing their ground and firing their bolts. While I do have plenty of examples of Marksdwarves emptying out their entire quiver of bolts before attacking the enemy, they do still have a habit of attacking the enemy when they run out of ammunition. Often I think what's actually happening is they are simply running out of ammunition before they get into combat in the first place. So we're going to roll over setting up Marksdwarves and how they work. In the background of this video, I've dug out a space for them to train, and now I'm setting up archery targets for them to shoot at. Once the dwarves have finished constructing all of your archery targets, we're going to set up an archery range zone. This requires you hitting either Z on the keyboard or clicking on the zones button. Then you're going to create an archery range, which is right beneath the barracks button. It operates the exact same way as a barracks if you've set those up before. However, it has a few extra little features, one of which is the direction that the dwarves need to shoot at the targets. Now, fortunately, this system is pretty smart in this version, so the little crossbow should be automatically facing the right direction. But if it's not, you can simply adjust it by clicking on these 4 buttons. Now we're going to set up our squads. As you can see, I already have some set up here already training elsewhere in the fortress, but for this, we're going to build a new squad. Now, when you're assigning dwarves to be Marksdwarves, you really want to look for dwarves that are brave in the face of imminent danger or dream of mastering a skill. But fortunately, because Marksdwarves is a less direct combat situation, it's actually good for just many different random dwarves to train a little bit in crossbows. Just keep in mind, you do not want to assign any dwarves that are assigned to mining or woodcutting, as that'll conflict with their civilian uniforms and you'll have problems with them dropping and picking up and dropping and picking up and dropping and picking up items. So you just want to look for some dwarves that dream of mastering a skill and ideally are a little bit brave. Now, I told them to have no uniforms so that we could set up a custom one. This is pretty simple. Generally, for your Marksdwarves, especially if they're going to be hiding in a tower or behind battlements in a protected position, they don't need too much armor. However, it is a good idea to at the very least give them bucklers, which is a form of shield that works best with the crossbows. So for this uniform, we're going to be giving them a crossbow, which is going to automatically equip a quiver, which needs to be made out of leather. We're going to give them bucklers, which is going to be our shield stand-in, and we are going to give them helms, just to protect their noggin. Of course, you could go full armor with this. It'll just take them a little bit longer to train because initially they're going to be slower moving back and forth, picking up their ammunition. You could also use leather armor if you want to be more specific by clicking the material button. The last thing I would like to note about this particular screen is down in the bottom left. If you are doing full suits of armor and you want them to wear shoes, meaning low boots or high boots, you want to click the replaces clothing button. This makes them strip naked and then put on their armor. However, if you are going to swap that toggle so that they're wearing foot armor, just make sure that they're going to keep that armor on, because it's kind of traumatizing having to suddenly throw your clothes off and be naked for a while, running around a fortress full of dwarves. Now that our uniform is set up, we are going to assign that uniform to this squad by clicking the Assign Uniform button, and we'll assign the crossbows that are at the bottom because that's the most recent one we've made. Now we're going to make sure that we have the things that we need in this fortress. Because we have a manager assigned, we don't need to do this manually. I'm going to tell my dwarves to make some steel bolts because we have a surplus of steel in this fortress. Of course, you could use iron, wood, bone, or any other material that you like. Of course, the more intense the material like steel, the more damage it'll do. Bronze is also pretty good, same with copper. Silver will get by in a pinch, and if you have to use bones, they are good for knocking things over, if nothing else. We're also going to queue up a bunch of leather quivers and our crossbows. We're going to make our crossbows out of steel as well. Then we're going to open up our equipment screen and click Update Equipment until everything is green. Once the dwarves have equipped all of their gear, we're going to make a stockpile for ammunition in our training zone, the little archery area that we built earlier. We're going to click on the ammunition button, and then we're going to click on Custom within the stockpile. Once it's open, you can see a bunch of types of ammunition we don't need here. In fact, we can get rid of or sell most of that other stuff. So we're only going to be using bolts. Leave everything else as is, but only keep bolts. Now that we have our stockpile and our zone set up, we're going to click on the archery range again. Then we are going to click on the little blue flag with a plus next to it, and this will allow us to assign our squad. Our squad is at the bottom of the list, so that's very easy. Once we click on the little hatchet in the corner, the squad is ready to train. Next, it's time to set up our training schedules. So we're going to click on the little schedule button down at the bottom of the squad once the squad is selected. Then we can decide between monthly orders, training, or ready. Ready just tells them to keep their stuff equipped all the time. Off duty, they put their stuff away. Monthly orders, they will alternate between training and putting their stuff away. And constant training is just training around the clock. Usually I start off with constant training around the clock and then set them to no orders so that they can go about their day as normal dwarves and help out in general affairs around the fortress while keeping their stuff equipped. And this is why you don't want them to be either miners or woodcutters. Now, there's an issue happening here. You'll notice that the bolts are disappearing when they hit the targets. They are being destroyed and they are not recoverable. The game used to have the option to allow for training ammunition, and people would use wooden bolts for this. However, we have a workaround. This is kind of a bug, but it's a bug that's more or less accepted by the community at this point if you want to use crossbow dwarves. Because in the current game, there's no specific way to tell them what type of ammunition to equip. They'll simply grab whatever's the highest value, which in this case usually means steel or whatever is the best. If we dig a small trench in front of our targets, when the dwarves go to fire their bolts, instead of the bolts hitting the target and then disappearing, they hit the target and then fall down 1 Z level. While this does split the stacks of 25, it doesn't take that much longer for the dwarves to simply go re-equip their bolts. It's maybe a millisecond if you're running at normal frame rates. So the bolts go back up and into the bins in the stockpile, and the dwarves re-equip them in a half a second, and then go back to training. This is actually a very good job for children, as there's no chance of friendly fire, they can't be hurt by the falling bolts, and they just simply run in a circle, stockpiling the bolts. So, with all of that covered, we have covered how to train Marksdwarves, but let's talk about combat. My dwarves are, however, firing many bolts at it. Asmel is now a mangled corpse, and the child is still sitting in the corner. But my Marksdwarves are still doing a great job shooting many bolts directly at it while holding their babies as they do. The Hollow Gorov Fights is now the full title of this creature. Steel Bolt strikes the Forgotten Beast in the body, tearing the muscle, bruising the gut. For the remainder of this tutorial, we are going to be talking about setups for your Marksdwarves themselves. Of course, you want them to have a place to shoot from, as well as a storage spot for their ammunition. You want the place for them to shoot from to be 1 tile wide, and ideally with a roof. If it doesn't have a roof, there is a chance an overly ambitious dwarf may decide to jump over the wall and run directly at the enemy. This can cause some problems when dwarves decide to yeet themselves over top of a wall and then try to use the worst melee weapon in the game, a crossbow, as a melee weapon, or alternatively their shield, and they may have some more luck. But you want them to stay where you want them, and then go get more ammunition. So with a simple design like this, you can pretty quickly set up an area for your dwarves to fight against an enemy, at least underground. This could also be replicated above ground, or on the edge of a cliff face, or on the edge of a trench, or just about anywhere you can imagine. Once the space has been dug out, we're gonna smooth the space in front, and then use the fortification tool to dig little slits. You could also construct fortifications or carve fortifications in constructed walls. Once this has been completed, we are going to dig a little trench in front of this. This is gonna further dissuade our overly ambitious Marksdwarves from climbing over or jumping through the fortifications and trying to attack the enemy. If there's no way back up, they're less likely to do so, especially if there's an overhang. So we're gonna dig 1 tile overhang underneath. Once this is all set up, as you can see, we can station our dwarves here without too much issue. They very happily stand there. Note, when an enemy is walking into this area, if this was actually a combat arena, do not tell your Marksdwarves to attack them. Simply stationing them is more than enough. Once they've been stationed or set to patrol an area, they will walk back and forth and then go get the nearest ammunition. But now I'm going to walk you through a real quick issue that some people run into. As you can see, I've dug out a small area directly behind them. This, in theory, would be used for ammunition. However, because the wall is only 1 tile thick and there's an open doorway, the dwarves automatically say, we're gonna clump up together in a little group, kind of a circle. So some of them will end up stationed on the wrong side of the wall. You don't want that because then there's less bolts flying. So you could either lock the door and then unlock it when they need to get ammunition, or we could build something like this, where it's a little bit further away and they know to stay in the hallway. If the entrance to your tunnel has access to the outer area, you may also want to lock the door on the right, just so that they have nowhere else to go, aside from get more ammunition. Now, even with setups like this, I do have to say Marksdwarves are very effective nearby a melee squad. So if you happen to have a melee squad or a whole bunch of trained dwarves, they will stand back and fire the entirety of their ammo supply before attempting to attack in melee. Even if the dwarves don't kill any invading enemy, they will debilitate them significantly to the point where they'll drop their shields, they'll drop their swords, they'll drop their weapons quite literally in front of you as they are attacking, making them very, very effective. One final thing that I should note is you should toggle the forbid used ammunition to forbid used ammunition during sieges. By default, when dwarves fire a bolt, it's automatically forbidden, so that they don't go running into fights to go gather them back. We want to retoggle this within the standing orders, sieges, and forbidding menu to forbid used ammunition during sieges. Once the siege is complete, you can then go clean things up. Keep in mind, a Forgotten Beast and Cavern Dwellers do not count as sieges, so if you're setting up to fight a beast or Cavern Dwellers, you may just want to toggle it back to forbid used ammunition. But to save yourself a lot of headache, leave it on during sieges, and then when you go to set up to fight in the caverns, just forbid used ammunition. Unless you are in melee range, then there is a chance they'll run in, pick up their ammo, and jump back and start shooting again, which is also quite neat to see. The last design I would like to show you here are two designs I have set up in my current fort. Here is one in the caverns where they have an ammunition depot, which is currently empty because it was all moved to our demo spot. And here is another one where we have a tower above the fortress. One layer beneath this is where they would get their ammo, and they are set to patrol in circles around the outside. But all in all, that brings me to the end of this video. If you think I've missed something, please leave a comment down in the description. I'd love to hear it. Maybe I'll learn something new. And if you learned something, or if you're gonna try this, let me know how it goes. And if you've been using Marksdwarves, or if you've been using Bow Dwarves, maybe with mods, maybe in vanilla, this is completely vanilla, I would love to know what your experience has been so far. At least for me, ever since the change where they simply equip the highest value ammo associated with the weapon they're using, be that a bow or a crossbow, they've been a breeze. They've worked just fine. I've had absolutely no issues with them. I find them to be very, very, very effective, and if using the little techniques I have here, they are as effective in fort defense, if not better than melee dwarves in some cases. Keep in mind, they do have a tough time against undead, but because they do such a good job causing enemies to drop their weapons or alternatively lose hold of their weapons, they can still be useful against undead as a form of disarming. Also, the casualties tend to be pretty low because I set them up in pretty protected areas. And when I do let them out in the open, they hang back for a good chunk of the fight. This makes them particularly effective against fire beasts or creatures that you can't get close to, like web spitters, for example. But all in all, thank you very much for watching this video. I hope you enjoyed it, and I hope to see you in my live streams or in the next one. Peace.